than you might think. Because the thing works like this. If a man says, I am lying, we say that it follows that he is not lying, from which it follows that he is lying, and so on. Well, so what? You can go on like that until you're black in the face. Why not? It doesn't matter. It is just a useless language game. That's a pretty squirrely G. That's supposed to be the letter G there, the word language. It's just a useless language game, and why should anyone be excited? Turing speaks up, raises his hand and says, what puzzles one is that one usually uses a contradiction as a criterion for having done something wrong. But in this case, one cannot find anything done wrong. Wittgenstein: yes, and more. Nothing has been done wrong. Where will the harm come? Turing speaks up again. The real harm will not come in unless there's an application in which a bridge may fall down or something of that sort. Wittgenstein responds, now raising his voice a little higher. Wittgenstein had a style in which he was like that on you, that's aggressive. He and a guy named Karl Popper, very aggressive speakers. Wittgenstein used to make students cry in his class. It's like, well, no, so. But he was a very original thinker, despite that. Okay, so Wittgenstein responds to Turing and says, the question is, why are people afraid of contradictions? It's easy to understand why they should be afraid of contradictions, etc., outside mathematics. That Wittgenstein knew that Turing was a mathematician. The question is, why should they be afraid of contradictions inside mathematics? Turing says, no, this is Wittgenstein talking about Turing. Turing says, because something may go wrong with the application, but nothing need go wrong. And if something does go wrong, if the bridge breaks down, then your mistake was of the kind of using a wrong natural law. Turing jumps up and says, you cannot be confident about applying your calculus until you know that there is no hidden contradictions in it. Wittgenstein immediately comes back with, there seems to me an enormous mistake there. Suppose I convince Rees, R-H-E-E-S, of the paradox of the liar. And he says, I lie, therefore I do not lie. Therefore I have a contradiction. Therefore, 2 times 2 is 369. Well, we should just not call that implication, that's all. Turing: although you do not know that the bridge will fall if there are no contradictions, yet it's almost certain that if there are contradictions, it will go wrong somewhere. Wittgenstein: but nothing has ever gone wrong that way yet. Ask yourself, who came out best in this dispute? Turing thought Wittgenstein didn't take seriously enough contradictions, right? And Wittgenstein thought Turing didn't take seriously enough. Why should one want to, say, formalize your work and get rid of contradictions? And they never came to an agreement on that point. The above little dialogues from a guy named Hodges, Wilfred Hodges. Okay, so that's Wittgenstein's solution to the liar paradox. So we've got well, I was going to say we have 2 solutions, but we sort of have 3. And we have one solution, which was Dowden's, which is quit using English. Then we have Wittgenstein's, which is why worry, be happy. You can handle with the problems if they show up, and you don't need any systematic treatment to get rid of contradictions. And then you have the third one that sort of came up in the discussion here, which is maybe this liar sentence isn't true or false. It's just meaningless. If it were meaningless, that would stop the contradiction. The problem with that is it doesn't really diagnose the ill. I mean, the only reason the sentence is meaningless is because otherwise you get a contradiction. Well, let me give you a similar sentence. You're going to call it meaningless too? I mean, it's so similar to the liar sentence. Okay, let's remind ourselves what the liar sentence was, right? This sentence is false. Or a strengthened version of that is this sentence is not true. And how about this sentence? This sentence is not written in Italian. That seems okay. I mean, why rule this out and not this? If you just say, I mean, isn't it just sort of arbitrary to call this meaningless and not call that meaningless? Boy, if you call this meaningless, you're really throwing a little of the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. It might still be the right thing. Let's go back to this sentence is not true. This is called the strengthened liar. By not true, I mean it's false or meaningless. Okay? If it's not true, then it's false or meaningless. Well, if you want to say the liar sentence is meaningless, then this sentence is meaningless, right? But it says it's either false or meaningless. That makes it true. So if meaningless, then true. But if so, then it's not true. Can you see a problem? Oh, well, suppose it's not true. Well, there are all kinds of things to assume. Three truth values you can put on here, or classically true, classically false, and lack of classical truth value. Say meaningless. If it's meaningless, then it's true. So it's not true. So the leap from here to here, how do I get from true? If it's true, then it's not true. Because that's what it says, right?
I don't get it.
Yeah, I didn't get the stuff what was the?
You can't do that, because if it's meaningless, it doesn't matter if it says it's not true, because it's meaningless.
Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't matter? Okay, maybe you're... so this is meaningless. But suppose I say, what I'm now saying is meaningless. If it's meaningless, then I just said something true, right?
That's true.
Oh, I see. That still seems to have some sort of like hidden assumption in it.
Sure does. What's going on here?
Like, I'm understanding you. Like, I want to accept that there's some sort of value to what you're saying.
Okay.
I don't know, that's just what I was thinking of.
Oh, I thought you see your hand like that.
Could have people trying to solve this by saying statements of truth value can only be made in the meta language. This is it's pretending to be a sentence in the language, not the meta language. Because of that,
They have tried something similar to that. What's the difference between an object language and a meta language, right?
Torture.
Torture. Okay, so you're talking about Alfred Tarski's meta-language, object language distinction. The object language is the language that you happen to be interested in at the moment. Any language could be an object language or a meta language. So we'll say pick English. English that contains the sentence, this sentence is false, say. And then the object language can be talked about in a language called the meta language. Like if the object language were Italian, we might use English to talk about Italian. Or if the object language was English, we might use Italian to talk about English. Or if the object language was, say, just a little part of English called mathematics, we might use English to talk about mathematics.
Wouldn't this just be like infinite regress?
In principle, I suppose you could always find a language to talk about another language, yeah.
So then they're always.
But you don't need to go up high enough to talk
it's
about what you want to talk
arbitrary.
about.
So, but. Okay.
So suppose this occurs in the object language. This is called L of the object language. Right? It says this sentence is false. Now, if you put some kind of restrictions that say truth and falsehood only apply to languages lower in your list of languages, right? So you got like, here's a picture. Object language, then we talked about it in L1, the meta language. But then if that's the object language, then it has a meta language L2, which is the meta-meta language of L0. And then there's L3 and L4. 2 written sideways isn't too pretty, but let's see how you go. Get up as high as you want. Okay. Now Hans is suggesting that maybe you want to rule out saying is false can only apply to languages lower in the hierarchy. So if you're using false 0 here, you got to have false, you got to have this subscript being bigger than this one. That is, you can talk about the truth of L0 that was a mistake. Oh, maybe I said it right, I don't know. It depends on how, we've got to have a formal way of signing these subscripts. So rather than get formal, let me just say it like this. You can talk about what sentences are true or false in L0 only in L1 or higher. You can talk about what things are true in L1 only in L2 or higher. This was Alfred Tarski's solution to this problem of the liar paradox. It's called Tarski's hierarchy of meta languages. And this is, if you look at the details, that was worked out. They get you out of the liar paradox. You can never really have this sentence is false being well formed because it violates the semantic rule about truth is always up to the next level. But he actually came up with a nice definition of truth in the higher level for a lower level. These are formal languages, and this is what you learn in your predicate logic class. You learn his definition of truth, which takes place up here, talking about the language down there.
So, I'm not sure I'm understanding. So is the sentences in the object language lack truth value? Or, no, that isn't right.
Yeah.
It is? Oh, okay.
Yeah. In this case, it's not well formed. You can't form this sentence. So this is the liar sentence, and he says, here's my solution to the liar sentence, the problem of the liar paradox. You cannot really, if you try to formalize what's going on in English, if you think of this as what's really going on in English, there's a hidden hierarchy of meta languages in here, then you can't really form the liar sentence. It's not well formed, and that's why you don't That's why the liar sentence can't be used to lead to the liar paradox.
So it's not well formed in the meta language? Or not?
It's not well formed at any level.
Okay.
If it wants to talk about its truth at its own level. They don't allow you. He set things up so you can't talk about truth at your own level. You can always talk about the truth of the lower guys. Now, an alternative is this, and Tarski actually took this. He's a famous Polish mathematician. He did most of this work in the 1930s, but he actually taught at UC Berkeley up until the 70s. He said, this looks like, when you think about the liar paradox, it looks like English is contradictory. And we're not going to be able to resolve these issues about the liar paradox by sticking with natural language, or the language, say, of English or Polish. That we have to shift gears and go to a formal language or an artificial language, an interpreted formal language, like you study in Philosophy 60, in which you're very precise about the rules of construction and so forth.